Sometimes when I'm lying in bed, hugging my wife in a warm bed, surrounded by my dogs, I feel thankful because you can be in a ditch somewhere trying to defend your nation with wet boots covered in mud. And you know what? You've been there 2 weeks and you're probably going to be there another month. And you're always having cold food. So, most of us will never see war. Hopefully, none of us ever see war. But, you know, reminds us how lucky we are, is what I'm trying to say whenever I see this kind of imagery. Because no matter what side you're on, you're usually not there because you want to be there, you know? This is my grandfather. Kind of looks like me, huh? Here, he's got little tanks on his lapel. He was a tanketeer at this point. These pictures are on Instagram, by the way. And this is my grandfather with my grandmother. Yeah, see? Yerevan. You got it right, brother. I was born in Yerevan. And yeah, there's a lot of stories about my grandfather. Not a lot. There's some stories about my grandfather, heroic stories that I know. I don't know how much of it is true. But he's got some amazing stories. I'm rooting for Ukraine. They didn't do anything to deserve this war. And as a nation, and again, I was in the U.S. Air Force, as a nation that believes in democracy and defending the weak, and supporting the weak and defending righteousness and heroes, I'm all for Ukraine and we should support them until they don't need any more help from us. Genuinely, that's how I feel. So yeah, I have a personal connection to those people, and I also have a personal connection to the military. I was part of a rescue operations unit. I was the maintainer, and so yeah, let's learn about it. I genuinely want us to be able to help them as much as possible because we're standing up for what's right, and the United States is the country that stands up for what's right and for the weak. I truly believe in that. That's how I am. All right, let's go.
This factory in Pennsylvania is making
Real quick, it's called Inside the Inside the U.S. Factory, making Ukraine's most important ammo by the Insider Business.
Ukraine's most important ammunition.
Shout out to your grandma,
155 millimeter
grandpa.
rounds are basically giant bullets used in artillery guns. The Scranton Army Ammunition Plant has been making steel shells since 1953. And today, demand is so high that it's making 11,000 of them every month. Ukraine may be firing more than half of that each.
Yeah, they're firing a lot right now, guys. Um, know a lot of information about the howitzers and everything. I just don't know how much I should share and how much of the video we should pay attention to. I think this is a good learning experience, so maybe I should. Um, the issue right now for Ukraine is when they first got these cannons, Ukrainian soldiers were excited because our cannons are so much more accurate than the Russian artillery. Our artillery is so much more accurate. And what started happening is um, they started warping the barrels because they were firing them too fast. Our artillery can be fired. It can fire 4 rounds in 1 minute if you needed to, but then you have to wait. You have to wait a bunch of time before you fire another round. I think the recommended time is, if there's Army or Marine Corps in the comments, let me know. What is the recommended firing rate for one of these cannons? I think it's a 40 seconds to every minute or something like that. Depending on the fire rate. I know that's a thing. So it wasn't just ammunition, because the Ukrainian soldiers, rightly so, start trying to put as many rounds down the range as they could to try to defend their front line, all the soldiers fighting. So they start warping those barrels. So the second shortage was the barrels. So I'm curious if they cover that at all. I think it's been an issue that's been fixed. I just don't know how.
Day.
Снарядів ніколи не буде вистачати.
So, there's a global shortage. Some experts are concerned that the US is burning through its own supply. So So why is this particular artillery ammo so important in Ukraine? And how is the US arming them during the shortage? At the start of the war, air power was expected to be the key to a Russian victory. They outnumbered Ukraine in military aircrafts 10 to 1. But Ukraine found ways to shoot down Russia's warplanes and defend against its missile attacks. Putin pivoted to massive artillery strikes.
By the way, the reason their air power, Russians' air power was so weak, first of all, it hasn't been maintained, number one. And number two, I think we provided a lot of weaponry to fight off their air power. So the Russian Air Force is literally afraid to get into the Ukrainian airspace unless they're backed up by their ground troops. So they only move ahead, their Air Force. They don't cross the territory unless they own that territory. They're literally afraid to cross the front line of the Ukrainian defense. And it's primarily because of U.S. tax. I'm pretty sure this is primarily the weapons we contributed to Ukraine.
The problem was most of Ukraine's artillery weapons dated back to the Soviet era. They required ammunition produced mostly by Russia and its supporters, China and North Korea. So Ukraine called on the US and its NATO allies for aid. The US alone sent Ukraine about 200 artillery guns that required ammo they already had in.
By the way, 200 artillery guns isn't enough. They're defending a territory the size of, I don't know, something gigantic. They're defending a lot of territory. Their front line is gigantic. And then you have artillery that's in maintenance, artillery that's being in transit, artillery that's just been broken or bent or even shelled. So at the end of the day, you're probably using only 2/3. With the Navy, it's a 1/3 rotation rule. For every one ship you have, you need to have two more. Every one ship you want in operation, you need to have two more ships. One in transit, the other one in maintenance. Literally. So if we take the Navy's, numbers, they're probably. I'm guessing it's around 50%. To be honest, they probably have about 100 artillery guns set up and ready to fire at one given point. I genuinely think so, and it's not a lot. It's not. I hope we send them more.
Stock, 155mm rounds.
There it is, 155s.
Now, they're one of Ukraine's most critical weapons. 155s are the perfect balance between power and weight. They're shot from howitzers, which are basically a cannon and mortar combined.
The way artillery warfare works, right? The reason fire and scoot is such an important term is what happens is there's artillery radar. Let's think of it that way. What happens is, let's say side A gets a notification that, hey, there's enemies at this location, right? The artillery for side A, here, let me put my hand here so you guys can see. The artillery for side A sets up and fires, okay, at side B. Then side B gets a notification through the radar systems, and they're able to track exactly where those shots were fired from side A because they're tracking the artillery shells and they can figure out exactly where those shots came out. Then side B immediately sends those signals, those coordinates to a howitzer, and then side B fires back at side A. And then side A either has to get the hell out of there before those shells come towards them, or they get hit. And now side A has the coordinates for side B's artillery because they also have a radar and they track their shells. So fire and scoot is one of the biggest things in the artillery world. It's being able to put down everything, get your gun ready, and then fire and get out. So it seems like they're just standing around and firing all the time, but usually the longer you stay, once you fire the first shell, you expect counting the moments because within 5 minutes to 15 minutes, shells are expected to come at you from the other side.
Which are basically a cannon and mortar combined. These massive guns fire shells high up into the air so that they drop down onto their targets. 155mm rounds
like
are
your name.
small enough to fire up to 20 miles, but still do serious damage. They're packed with 24 pounds of TNT and explode on impact.
It's the
sending
perfect ratio.
Deadly shrapnel in all directions.
It can
They're
go
also
far
less
enough
expensive than fancier weapons.
without being too heavy.
Javelin anti-tank missiles can cost as much as $78,000,
I
and
thought
these
there were
shells
more.
sell for as little as $800. The Scranton
that's
Army
cheap.
Ammunition Plant builds the steel shells for the U.S.'s most basic 155mm
You just take steel and
round,
TNT, and I think we
the
might be running low on TNT.
M795. The U.S. is producing 24,000 a month, almost double what it was making before Russia invaded Ukraine. And nearly half of that supply comes from this factory. Everything starts in the billet yard.
Yep, there's
Workers
the steel.
move steel rods to the next phase, the forge shop. 4 robotic saws slice the rods into 14-inch long chunks called billets.
Efficiency is key to speed.
Then they heat them for an hour at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This softens them up so they're easy to shape.
Yeah.
You couldn't possibly forge a billet at room temperature. We're basically turning the steel.
So this is called pressure forming, isn't it? This is called pressure forming. You heat up a material, and then under heat, you literally stretch it, and yeah.
In the Play-Doh.
Then machines stretch and shape the billets
there
into
you
their
go.
final form.
I think this is called pressure forming.
Another one adds a nose, which makes it aerodynamic.
There you go again.
It comes into the press. It's still a tube. As it
Yeah.
leaves the press, it's now a projectile.
They're inspected and then fed to the production shop. Then the grand finale. Workers reheat the billets, then cool them in a 6,000-gallon oil bath. After some final lathing and polishing, workers hang the shells on hooks. Then they get a fresh paint job. The entire process takes about 3 days. After the shells are done, they take a truck ride to another factory that adds TNT. Then they're ready for the battlefield. It's there that soldiers will add the fuse and turn it into a lethal bomb.
So depending what type of fuse you can add is you can get a different reaction, guys. Some fuses explode over the ground, so it can explode 100 feet up in the air, or some fuses are meant to explode after the impact. I don't know much about the fuses on the 155s, but I know that I remember seeing there's like 4 main types, and they're color coded too.
155s have been used by the US and its allies since World War I. They were small enough to hit
Thanks,
targets
Thomas.
up to 7 miles away, but packed enough power to penetrate enemy trenches.
United Nations guns go into action against red positions.
After World War II, 155mm became the standard artillery size for NATO countries. Today, the US has rounds equipped with GPS guidance systems that cost over $100,000 per shell. Since the war began, all
These GPS guided systems, don't they have like wings on
the
them? I
NATO
love it.
allies have sent Ukraine some form of military aid.
You're right, Instinct.
They've donated tanks, anti-aircraft guns, rocket launchers, and missile defense systems. But the US tops the list. They've sent roughly $42 billion worth of weapons to Ukraine.
Yeah, I'm glad we did.
While expensive weapons like these make headlines, it's our
I'm glad that we did. It's not because it's Russia, but it's because it's the right thing to do. No, this is forgot. It's 2023. There hasn't been a big war since World War II. There has, and it's a global economy. It's not about borders anymore. We're past that. And they're doing so many things that are wrong, like freaking bombarding civilians. Let's not get into it. It's just wrong in so many ways. I am so happy we're supporting Ukraine. I am so happy. Genuinely, I'm so happy.
artillery that Ukraine is using more than anything. This past spring, Ukrainian forces were firing up to 8,000 155mm shells a day.
8,000 shells a
According
day,
to a
guys.
June
Holy
report,
shit.
Germany sent Ukraine so many shells that it had about 20,000 left in its stockpile. That's enough only for a few days of intensive combat. Critics are worried the same thing could happen.
8,000 shells a day. How many shells is that a minute? How hard is it to divide 8,000 by 1440 hike? They're firing 5.55 shells a minute. They're firing five. It's like one howitzer at full go.
Turn to Japan for more TNT.
We've hit the level at which the Pentagon planners are uncomfortable going any lower because of the demands for other war plans.
The Army has spent billions updating its factories to make more 155s. They want to make 85,000 shells per month by 2028, over 3 times the current output. But it could still take years to refill the stockpile.
You need to hire people. You need more of the steel to build the shells. You need to have a larger factory space. You have to follow all of the safety requirements because each of these has to meet a military specification for usage and have to go through the inspection process.
In July 2023, the US announced its decision to send Ukraine a controversial type of 155, equipped with cluster bombs. Russia has also used them. Each shell contains 88 small explosives, or bomblets, that are released in midair. They can cover an area up to 7 acres and destroy everything from trenches to tanks. But these rounds are banned in over 120 countries because the bomblets sometimes fail to explode on impact and harm civilians who find them later on. 94% of recorded cluster bomb deaths are civilians, and almost 40% of those are children. The US has already sent thousands to Ukraine in its latest $800 million military aid package in July. President Biden has said that the cluster bombs are only a temporary solution.
So cluster bombs are a terrible, terrible thing. Each one of them have 88. I think I didn't hear. Maybe he said it. 88 shells. And the thing is about that many shells, you can't have it. Not all of them explode. A cluster bomb goes over the area, opens up, drops 88. Let's call them grenades, and those 88 grenades fall on the ground. They can have time fuses, or they can be explode on impact. And unfortunately, not all of them explode. And then what happens is when a farmer comes farming, or most of the time it's a kid finds a shiny thing, grabs it, and explodes and hurts people. Cluster bombs are really, really bad. A lot of countries have already signed treaties about not using cluster bombs. The only way Ukraine has made it okay to use cluster bombs is they've said every time we use one of these weapons, they are collecting data, saving in the location about where they used it, and then before making that area okay for civilians to go into, they're gonna go and scan and do mine scanning and try to find anything harmful in that area. Before, when these mines were used, bombs were used, they were just scattered, and then no one made a note where it was dropped, what happened to it, and then a decade later, someone gets hurt. So at least I'm glad that they're keeping inventory and they're going to make sure they clean up every area. You know what I mean?
Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky said a lack of ammunition is what's keeping his military from reclaiming Russian-occupied territory more quickly. But the U.S. Army says its goals for increasing its 155 output are on pace. That's good for Ukraine, as it could be the difference in taking back their country. In June, they launched a counteroffensive against Russian troops. They tried to break Russian defenses with heavy tanks at first, but switched their strategy to artillery fire. It's been moving slowly.
Yeah, that's about it.
So they'll need plenty of shells for the long haul.
Ой, миссия.
Yeah, so unfortunately, if everything's mined and has dragon teeth, thank you for the hearts. If everything's mined and has dragon teeth, you can't move forward no matter what type of a tank you have. I don't care if you have an Abram, you drive over a mine, you're gonna get your treads blown off, you know? So yeah, unfortunately, it's a slow-moving war. They're gonna need a lot of new ammunition. I'm glad we're supporting them. I don't know it doesn't seem like we're really. It seems like we're manufacturing faster than we're sending them. I think that was what we learned. But at the same time, we might be draining our all our stocks. So I think it's a righteous war, and we should be supporting them. Yep.